Hi, everyone, and welcome to Artists Offstage. Today, joining me, we have one of our resident artists, our baritone, Aaron Keeney. Welcome, Aaron. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Pablo. It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. So if this is your first time joining us for Artists Off Stage, this is just a chance to get to know our resident artists a little bit better as people, because obviously, given the pandemic situation right now, we have not actually met a lot of these artists in person. Uh, and certainly we have not seen them on the stage. We've only seen them in our digital offerings. So this will just kind of serve as a way to get to know Aaron a little bit better. So I'll start off with kind of a broad question about, how did you get into opera?
um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's really a pretty good question. Uh, I come from a family of scientists, and I just sort of always assumed that I would follow in those in that path, and go to college, go to graduate school, get my PhD, do all of that. Which I started going. I went to college at Oberlin so that I could pursue the double degree program to get both a degree in chemistry and a degree in voice. Because chemistry had always been something that I was interested in. It was super fun. I had a fantastic teacher in high school, and I really just sort of fell in love with the subject. But I also really enjoyed doing the musicals in high school, and I think that's how many opera singers got started in performing and musical theater. And so I decided after my junior year, maybe I want to give this singing thing a try. So I started taking voice lessons and I auditioned, and Oberlin ended up being a great fit for me musically, academically, socially. It just felt exactly right. So that's where I went. And after about 2 years, I realized that I hated being in lab. And I hate standing at the lab bench. I hate working under the hood. It's just, I find it tedious and terrible. And it's awesome that there's so many people that enjoy that part of it, but I am not one of them. You can put me in front of a spreadsheet for 8 hours a day and I'll be happy, but the lab stuff drives me insane. So I decided at that point, okay, I'm going to focus a lot harder on my singing degree, and just doing it more and more, falling in love with different parts of the musical world, and going through some early music, and I ended up realizing that opera was really what I loved.
Nice. So, I mean, pardon my ignorance, but when I think of chemistry, I think of it as being mostly lab work. What was the part of chemistry that you did like?
The math.
Ah,
I actually almost switched to a math major my sophomore year, and I kind of wonder if I had switched to a math major, I might have fallen in love with that and ended up not being a singer. Uh,
mm-hmm.
I don't know whether that's good or bad is not for me to decide, but
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like I've heard people talk about how there are actually some similarities between music and math. How do you think about it?
I mean, with that kind of a background, I'm a very analytical person.
Mhm.
And so, just in terms of sort of seeing how the music fits together and being able to uh, learn music quickly and sort of get a picture for what it should look and sound like, I think that's very, very helpful. And there are many similarities in sort of a problem solving way when it comes to learning music. How do I need to picture this passage so that I can think about it like this to make it make sense to my brain? When should I be thinking in this key, when should I be thinking in this key? And just sort of looking at those chunks. It's very similar to the way that we have to find a reference frame for a specific math or physics problem and understanding what is the best approach to take.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to hear you talk about that because I feel like, when people normally think of artists, they think the process of, putting an opera together or something like that is a very creative process. And to hear you talking about it, it seems more like uh, kind of analytical in some ways.
I would question the dichotomy of analytical and creative.
Okay.
I think that they are in some ways very much the same thing. And a lot of this is the way that we sort of encounter math and science in our education, and we are taught that math is a set of, processes that are to be followed exactly to get a right answer. But the fact of the matter is that is not really math. That is just reiteration. The math itself is a creative process. It's a way that we take what we see in the world and are able to distill that to some kind of a model that we can use to further our understanding. And that requires creative reinterpretation of the things that we see. I guess going, way back, this is an older example, but thinking about looking up at the stars in the sky and being able to figure out what does that mean in terms of where all of these planetary bodies are related, right? And for so long, we just sort of assumed that the Earth was the center of the universe. And I say we, I mean, a ton of civilizations had figured it out thousands of years ago that obviously we were going around other things. But, so we had the much of Western culture after the Greeks. Oh, the Earth is flat and everything goes around it, just because it's easy to picture ourselves as the center of everything. And then, a couple of really creative people were staring at the stars for a long time. That just doesn't quite make sense. And you have people like Galileo. And for me, I think the most impressive one is Kepler, who was able to track stars in the sky and then figure out, all of these things are tracking in elliptical orbits around the sun. That's a level of brilliance and creative thought, actually being able to see, okay, from these shapes, what would these shapes look like somewhere else? And it is both analytical and creative.
That's so interesting. So putting yourself in the shoes of like 5-year-old version of you, like what did you want to be when you grew up?
Let's see, 5-year-old me. I think 5-year-old me may have been like my geology and paleontology phase. I definitely had lots of rock collections, and I remember going around to all of like the shale beds in central Pennsylvania and collecting fossils with my parents.
Awesome.
That was super fun. I think that was about that age. I think that was when the geology and paleontology stuff was really going. That lasted for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I think.
Do you still have any of those fossils?
We have some of them for sure. Like some of the really cool ones that we were excited about, we kept. A lot of them we ended up donating to either the local high school or the local college for like their outreach programs. We had a lot of rocks.
So like, what were some of the cool ones that you kept? Like what?
I remember the first trilobite that I found. That was like one of my favorite fossils. I remember that it wasn't actually a whole one. You could see where it had actually split as the rock had moved, and so it was like in two pieces. The head was in one spot and the body was in another. And my father once found this massive brachiopod fossil. It's probably about that 2 or 3 inches across, which is, and it was a huge, gorgeous specimen. It actually came out of the rock, so you had both the cast and the mold, and it was
cool.
It was, yeah. I'm pretty sure we still have that one because that fossil was a big find.
Yeah. So throughout your journey, as you've gone through multiple iterations and multiple interests throughout your life, who have been your biggest cheerleaders in terms of like who's really supported you at every step or really maybe pushed you to overcome an obstacle or something like that?
Yeah. My parents have always been immensely supportive. They always did a fantastic job of just fueling my curiosity.
That's so important.
which right, which is so important. And I can definitely think of many teachers in high school and middle school who did the same thing. And in some ways, I think that it's much more important that teachers fuel our curiosity than it is that they actually teach us things. Because if they spark an interest in the subject, we'll just be motivated to learn it ourselves, and we can go do, and like really, that's the important skill. Um, and so, my chemistry teacher, Mr. Long, that's the reason that I went into chemistry. My choir teacher, Mr. Hiles, that's the reason I went into music. And I think it would also be important to mention my high school Spanish teacher, Miss Gardner, who at one point, after seeing a musical, said to me something like, it's really a shame because you have this beautiful voice and you're going to spend your whole life tucked away in a corner of a chem lab somewhere. that was an eye-opening moment for sure, and that has definitely stuck with me. And I'm curious. I think that had a lot to do with why I started taking voice lessons and why I started pursuing singing seriously.
So interesting. Yeah, because you would normally think like, oh, the voice teacher is the one that kind of made that that push, or the choir teacher.
True.
But interesting
to
that
be
like
fair,
a Spanish teacher is the one that kind of flipped that switch.
Exactly. You never really know where that kind of inspiration is going to come from. And at that point, I despite the fact that I love choir, I had never really considered it as something that I was good enough at or passionate enough about to actually pursue. And you never know where that little push is going to come from.
Yeah.
But in some ways, that was a really big push, I think.
So thinking about, in your relatively young career, obviously being at the young, quote unquote, young artist stage, what would you say are the biggest challenges and rewards so far of pursuing this path?
The biggest challenges are probably finding the opportunities to do it. Is about and I think that's a massive umbrella, and that involves it involves honing your craft, which of course requires individual work, but also requires you to get into situations where you can practice being on stage, and that's why something like being a resident artist at Minnesota Opera is so helpful, because it's giving me the opportunity to work a lot every day at doing this and being able to pay my bills while doing that. So
an important aspect.
It is right, and and that I bring that up because that's part of what is under that umbrella. And essentially, every singer I know has some kind of side hustle, and there are weird stigmas about that. There shouldn't be, especially in the current economic climate. And we sort of have this idea that, all of these great singers in the past, just sang and made their fortune while singing, which was true once they really got going. But the fact of the matter is, they all had other jobs. Richard Tucker, I think, started singing professionally when he was 33 or 34, and before that, he was I forget, it was either like a textiles or a fur salesman. And we hear about all of these other things. Like this person was in the army, this person was a minor league baseball player. Like they all had these other skills or these other jobs that they used while they were learning their craft. My person, I've been talking about, philosophies of teaching. My side hustle is working as a tutor. I teach primarily calculus, physics, chemistry, statistics, math subjects. And that's something that I'm passionate about. I love doing it. And just having that other income stream, especially when you don't have a regular singing job, is extremely helpful. Just to tide over those dry spells.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kind of diversifying your income streams.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's what everybody talks about, regardless of what career you're in.
that's just smart financial planning.
Yeah, but it's also necessary financial planning.
Absolutely.
Un, yeah, it's
Um, so, we've been talking a lot about kind of your career and all of those things. So, but when you're not working, what what would you normally be doing? Let's say a hobby or some sort of other interest that is outside of the chemistry and music side of things.
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my hobbies are all extremely nerdy. Um, the things that my wife is laughing at me in the background. Uh, I I've been playing a lot of bridge, especially over the pandemic. Just really getting back to that because you know, it's just a constant logic puzzle, but it also involves some communication and some trust, and it's a really interesting team effort. I've been playing chess with a fair number of my friends. I've been playing a lot of chess with the resident artist director, Emily Bashai. We play a lot, both online, but also sometimes at breaks while we're in staging rehearsals for Albert Herring. Um, and sort of we've started playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with our college friends,
Oh,
which has
that's
just
awesome.
been, and it's funny. It took the pandemic for that to happen, and now all of a sudden we're staying in touch with all of our closest friends from college so much more, um, which has been one of those surprising silver linings to the world being turned upside down, and just like, oh, I could have been making the time to hang out with all of these people that are super important to me,
Hmm.
and that has been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I look forward to our Tuesday night games every week because it's it's one of the biggest highlights because it's just a couple hours where we get to live in a different world and problem solve as a team, and forget about the usual problems that we have.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's so necessary.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously we're talking about how the world is a bit upside down. Um, as in terms of like your singing and your artistry, like how do you feel like you've evolved as an artist this particular year, which has been quite unusual?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question. Um, I remember, sort of thinking in January, February about how the last little bit of graduate school was going to be tough. I had to get my recital together. I was going to be doing a role in the opera that semester, and everything would have been fine, but there wouldn't have been the time to, really sit and work technically.
Mhm.
Um, and then the pandemic hit, and we left New York. And except for the couple of requirements that I had to do to, check all the boxes to get my degree, I basically didn't sing for 2 months, um, and I just didn't feel like singing. It was a really difficult time, and I didn't feel inspired to make music.
Yeah,
I think that was a common thing that a lot of people were feeling.
yeah.
Um, but a few months went by, and I was getting ready to come to Minnesota, and I started, say, okay, it's time to start getting back to it. And when I started singing again after that, I all of a sudden felt a sort of freedom that I hadn't felt
Mm.
for possibly ever.
Mhm.
I just felt more comfortable in my singing and in my singing body, and just all of a sudden I was able to make huge technical strides that I was prohibited from making previously.
Mhm.
Um, some of that is getting older, some of that is perspective. Some of that has been this year having the opportunity to be at Minnesota and only work on the repertoire that feels right to me, physically, vocally, and artistically. Um, and it doesn't mean, I've also picked many things that have challenged myself, not just
Mhm.
things that were comfortable, but just anything that was physically or vocally demanding that somehow spoke to me artistically, and that has been um, a sort of motivation that has allowed me to make technical strides that I don't think I would have been able to make in a normal year.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess in some ways I am extremely grateful for this chunk of time to just work on what it means for me to be an artist.
Yeah, that's huge, and
And
that's certainly something that not a lot of artists get in terms of like
yeah,
in a normal situation. You're just kind of grinding from one gig to the next and not really getting
exactly.
that
Yeah, exactly.
self-reflective time. And yeah.
Yeah, and when we were asked to do these resident artist showcases, at first I was like, ugh, I don't have any good ideas for recital, but I was forced to think about it, and I ended up with a project that I actually feel really good about, and it is probably the first time I've ever felt passionate about a recital that I put together, and just be
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a recital that says something about who I am and says something that I think people should be thinking about and talking about. Um,
Absolutely. No, that's great to hear that is what you got out of that experience for sure. Um,
yeah.
so with um, as we were saying, the world's kind of turned upside down. There's a lot of things that could be considered, crises like a
Hmm.
pandemic. Um, Obviously, with the murder of George Floyd and Dante Wright. What do you think is the role of art in times of crisis? I guess in broader terms.
Sure. I mean, that's an incredibly difficult question. And there are certainly people who are more qualified to answer that question than I am. Um, my, I think my opinion is that art does better at art is a better medium for asking the right questions rather than giving the right answers,
Mm.
right? And because I know, and it's not just that art asks questions, it's that we can we can lead people to ask we can lead people to ask questions and have discussions. And the reason that I say that I think art is better at asking the right questions rather than giving answers is because when we proclaim answers from the stage, there is no way for us to reach the people who vehemently disagree with us.
Mhm.
Uh, there is no way to call other people into the broader discussion. But if we can reach out to the people whom we disagree with and shift their perspective, which is something that art is fantastic at, and especially opera with with these performing arts, there is so much that we can do through the music, through our acting choices, that can allow people to understand somebody else's point of view. And I think if we can give people the opportunity to witness what somebody else's experience is and how their experience and how their own biases um, create or are related to those experiences, I think that gives us a much better opportunity for dialogue. Um, it's it's especially difficult right now. In the we are in Minneapolis, which has become which has sort of become the epicenter for all of the debate around race relations and police brutality in this country. And, you know, what, 12 hours ago, we just had another incident. And the country is, and society as a whole is so divided about this that if, you know, we need to find ways to actually help people understand what the issues are, because if people are unwilling to see the problem, there's no way that we can tell them what the answers are.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's interesting.
was a-
You mentioned the word dialogue, and I'm someone who's very interested in dialogue, and I think of dialogue as being a conversation that is geared towards learning from one another rather than proving your point.
Exactly. And that you have just sort of summed up the core of what I think I was trying to get at, and that dialogue requires listening.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, people usually, you know, people don't use the word watch opera, they use the word listen to opera,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're going, you know, and I would like to think that when we are on stage, people are listening to us and that we have a chance to talk about those important issues.
Absolutely.
That might be pretty naive, but I would like to think and hope that that is the case.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would be fascinated to have this conversation with Lee Bynum or anybody else from Impact and see people who are much better suited to answering these kinds of difficult questions than I am.
Definitely. But at the same time, it is important for all of us to be thinking about these questions, and having our own answers.
Yeah, I was.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was. In many ways, that's sort of what I was hoping to get at from my showcase recital.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a pretty dark piece, and it definitely did a number on my mental health for for a couple of weeks. But I wanted people to be able to follow that path. What happens when we don't listen to each other, when we only reinforce our own selfish instincts?
Mm-hmm.
Because in many ways, I really think that is where a lot of the conflict, and just the fact that Black Lives Matter is a debate shows a lack of listening. The fact that, you know, we can say Black Lives Matter and somebody says, no, this, it just shows a shocking lack of listening and lack of understanding. And it's in, I think, you know, from watching my Facebook feed with the very, you know, from the very conservative area where I grew up, this belief that you know, what we have always thought is infallible, and this inability to examine ourselves and examine the power structures that we have set up as potentially being fallible, whether this is the justice system, whether this is religion, whether this is just the views that we carry around in our daily lives. And the inability and the unwillingness to examine those for fault and make changes to help that would be better for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
I think is the main root of the issue that I have seen from my specific vantage point onto white America. There are, you know, again, there are probably people who have much more detailed, experienced, and and analytical, thoughtful answers.
For sure.
But that's what I was trying to attack with my recital.
Mhm, mhm. So I want to get us out of here with one more question,
Sure.
to kind of end on a slightly more uplifting note.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So where are you currently finding joy and inspiration?
Sure. I mean, I think we've actually already talked about a lot of these things. Playing bridge with my father has been fantastic. Keeping up with my friends through these Dungeons and Dragons sessions, playing chess, whatever. Going on walks with my wife and my dog has been, a really big, important source of joy. And I don't know about, yeah, inspiration is such a weird word. It's not like, oh, I do this and now I want to make art. But it keeps me healthy and in a space where I do in fact want to continue to put effort into creating things.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Aaron, I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me this morning. I hope you have a great rest of your season, and I can't wait to see all your work going forward. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it should be really fun. Thank you so much, Pablo. It's been really great to talk to you.
Absolutely.